right. Hello, everybody. So glad to see you. It's literally a children's song that I learned while taking care of my nibbling once. Hello, everybody. So glad to see you. Hello, everybody. Anybody else know this song? Okay, you can be all right with it. Come on in, come into the room, come into the room. Hi, Virgo Sistren.
Hi, darling.
How are you? It's good to see you, beautiful self.
So good to see you. Oh my goodness.
Oh my goodness, and you're on sabbatical.
Oh,
I
yes.
can't believe that you're even willing to say hi to us. I'm like, thanks, girl. I wore a Prince for you.
Oh my gosh. What?
Mhm.
I just listened to an old Prince album, the actual album, like an hour ago.
Oh, so Prince is with us right now. Prince is like, I'm also part of this conversation. And I feel like Prince was into data. I feel like Prince was like constantly evaluating and shifting. Um,
Yes.
how is the sabbatical time feeling?
It's feeling good. It's feeling different because I'm not working. Um,
Have you
I
ever
mean,
done that before as an adult?
no, I love to work.
Yeah,
So,
me too. I'm like, work is my happy place, but
right.
resting is also apparently necessary. So,
Yeah, I mean, and truthfully, I'm writing right
yeah,
now. So
yeah,
it's not a 100% break,
yeah,
but it's very different from my normal day to day.
yeah. Do you write every morning, every day? Like,
Um, mornings are my most effective time to write when
yeah,
it's, and I live in the city.
yeah,
The city is fairly quiet in the mornings.
yeah.
So yeah.
Awesome. I'm glad you're here. Just to orient people to the conversation, Zuri Tau. It's a Tau?
Hmm.
Is that how we say it? Which is wrong in the book. We're fixing it for the next printing. I don't know why everything wants to say Thai, and it's just like that's not someone else. Some beautiful person is out there with that name, I'm sure. Um, but Zuri provided the um, in the book. There's these in the book. Holding change is what we're talking about. Holding change, the way of emergent strategy facilitation and mediation. Zuri did this whole section of assessments for us. So we have a group efficiency assessment, we have a group relationship assessment. We are able to understand how to navigate things with co-facilitators, how to quickly assess emergent strategies presence in the room, how's the container going, um, and whether mediation is potentially the right move or not. So these are the assessments in the book, and we're going to talk about that. But before we jump into it, this may or may not happen today, but part of what's been happening on these is we've had kind of bot bombed or troll bombed, or I'm not quite sure exactly what's happening. So if that starts to happen and you're in here as a non-bot, as a human being, you can help by ignoring what the bots are saying and not engaging them as like don't be like, yeah, I'm gonna win an argument with this person. Like that's not what's gonna happen. You can report it as spam or report it as harassment if it gets to that point. And you can also just tap your screen in a way that makes the comments kind of go down. So I'm not looking at the comments, and that I'm going to bring my presence to Zuri, and that's always an invitation to bring your presence to this incredible, beautiful person in front of us. If you have actual questions you want to ask, next to the comment box, there's a little camera, plus camera. Don't push that. Only Zuri and I are going to be here. But next to that is a little comment bubble with a question mark in it. You can ask questions. So I have some questions. We'll start there. And then if you have questions as we go along. So hope that's clear for everybody. That's how we're going to roll. I'm learning all the time, Zuri. It's been so exciting. So I think the first thing I want to ask you, because I met you in liberation space. I met you at Black Organizing for Leadership and Dignity. And I was like, who is this super cool person over here who's just like taking all these notes? So I knew from the moment we met that liberation was something you were about, something that you were interested in. And I want to understand what liberation, Black liberation, means to you.
Yes. I'm trying to think how long ago that was
I
when,
think it was like 2014 or something. Like it was
yes,
whenever, yeah, it was long ago. We had totally different hair.
we did.
Yeah.
I had a different name too. So
Yeah, literally, you had a different name. We had different hair. We were doing all different things back then. We lived in different places, maybe. Like, I'm like, it's all changed.
true, true. And yet here we are again.
Yeah. We have not changed, and our Virgo nature of excellence has not changed. So,
Thank you. Thank you. Um, wow, I love this question. Um, I have been thinking about liberation so much lately.
yeah.
Um, and I've been thinking about unity, which is, I think, I think how we all should be thinking about it, honestly.
Yeah.
Um, so I'm going to share like my thoughts on it, but in no way do I think this is like the definition or even like really my
No,
definition.
it's really like what it is for you in this moment. Yeah.
Yeah, it's evolving. So right now I'm working with a couple of groups of people. Um, this Liberatory Leadership Collective, Black Mecca Project. I also founded a liberatory research initiative last year.
Yeah.
So the word liberatory is like everywhere. Like it's
Yeah.
just, it is all, it's all that I'm doing. But when I really start thinking about it and like what it's meaning for me now is thinking about liberation like as this process and um, an activity and also practice that we
Yeah.
engage in. And
Yeah.
so personally, what I see like my liberatory practice as being is creating conditions where people can feel love and where people can feel their dignity.
Yeah.
So that's like how I'm practicing it right now. And a lot of that is about creating space.
Yeah.
Uh, I also think that when I think about liberation, it's not like about liberating anyone. Like that is
Yes.
not, that's not my role to liberate someone.
That's right.
And I'm thinking a lot about release and releasing like, what is coming to us.
Mm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And there's like I think because I am a Virgo, because I am a very action oriented person, and also like have been around movement spaces and in movement spaces for a long time,
Yeah.
a lot of my practice around liberation has always been about like resistance
Yes.
and activity because
Yeah.
always something happening. There's
Yes.
to be fighting against. And so I think what I've learned in the last decade really is that the cultivation aspect of liberation is just as important as the resistance.
That's right. I
So,
love that.
yeah.
I
Mhm.
love that. Well, and that actually makes me want to ask you another question, which is what brought you into movement in the first place? Like, was it a given? Did you grow up in that environment, or was it something you were politicized into and chose? Like,
Mm.
or both and?
Yeah, I was definitely not born into it. You know, I was not born in the South, but I was primarily raised here.
Okay.
What had a huge influence on me was and
Let's say that one more time.
the church.
Okay.
So big influence on me, right? So it was like as a young person, it was all about like service. And
Yeah.
so I was not politicized as a young person, but in my mind I knew like you're not living life right if you're not living life with other people
Right.
as a priority.
That's
And
right.
so that was very as a young person and it wasn't until I graduated from college, came back to Atlanta that I started doing movement work.
Ah.
And we were organizing around police brutality in Atlanta. And I mean, I was politicized doing that work. I understood what power meant in a completely different way through doing that. And I also began to see like what was community outside of a faith community. So that was a big shift for me, and like, how I've chosen community. I mean, Black, brown, queer women. I learned so much from them. Black moms who were like, well, we were all Black moms at the time. Many of us who were like bringing our kids to these meetings, doing power analysis, and handing out snacks. So that's
Right.
really, yeah, that was the seed for me.
And at some point, you became the evaluation goddess of Black movement. So, what drew you into the realm of research, evaluation, surveys, data? Like, what pulled you onto that path particularly?
Mm-hmm. I think connected to service was always like a very practical side of it for me, which was my nature. I was like, well, like if we're doing things, we should also be concerned with how to make them better.
That's right.
I was just like, of course we're not doing it perfectly. So like, how should we improve, and how should we determine the standards by which we determine like what is going well, what's not going well.
Right.
So as a young person, I didn't even know that evaluation existed. Like when I thought about research, to me, that was something that scientists did in a lab with like a white. I think of like Black people. I didn't think about like women. You know, when you pull like in your mind, if you associate, some of these careers, like that just wasn't there for me. And so when I went back to Atlanta around the same time that I was doing this political work, I also started to learn about research when I was in grad school. And I was like, oh my God, like, what? Like you can like do this professionally? Like people will pay me to like them ask questions? I was so into it. And I was volunteering for this this youth development program through my graduate program to do like basic analysis to figure out like, are these programs actually helping the youth who are involved?
Right.
So I was doing it for free. I was loving it. And then they wanted to hire some of us. Every other student was like, yeah, no, the whole research thing were good. And I was just like, I'm going to start a business. Like, this is
like,
my work. Right. So that was the initial entry for me. But it wasn't until I started working with Bold that I really began to practice and began to be critical about the way that I was taught about research evaluation, because I was doing the political work, thematic work, the Black liberation education, all of that began to work on my technical mind. So yeah, Bold changed my life and changed my practice way.
That's what Bold be doing. But that makes me want to ask you now, one of the questions, it's so interesting to hear this because I feel like the path for me with facilitation was very similar, where it's just like, obviously this is needed. It's the practical offer I can make while I learn everything. And then when someone offered to pay me, I was like, wait, what? Like that? And it makes me curious, what were the values you were taught about research, and how have those changed as you went through these transformations and Black experiences?
Ooh, that is a good question. I think what we're taught, if in any sort of graduate program, period, doesn't matter if you're in the hard sciences or the social sciences, one, we're taught this myth that research is neutral. It's pretty much the standard, like the first hit when you come in the door. You're also taught directly and indirectly that having the university or institutional mandate to study something is enough to then go after that. So every company that worked with and like doing a traditional evaluation work, like those communities didn't necessarily always opt in,
right,
involved, or even understood the extent of what we were going to do with that research.
right.
And so I think what I began to understand was the people who were interpreting whatever data that was being collected before, it was like, that's the expert's job. You're the one who gathers, collects, interprets, and then puts out a report. Like that was supposed to be how things were done well. And now, for me, that's actually unethical. And that's what I talk about and teach and write about. Like, how do we do research in a liberatory way that pushes against that myth and that lie that somehow other people should determine how we interpret our truth in our communities, what is meaningful for us.
That's right. Oh,
yeah.
I love that. I'm so grateful that you do that. And I do feel like you're one of those people who embodies a teaching, like everywhere you go and everything you touch. Like people are like, oh shit. Like, I'm letting myself be a subject of people who don't necessarily love me, care about my community, share my worldview, and what kind of conclusions will they possibly draw? And I'm like, oh, right. So then that leads us into movement space, which is like, I think of movement space as one of those places where philanthropy has really driven the culture of evaluation, the culture of our metrics and data, right? Which is essentially that same thing of like, there's no guarantee of love, care, investment. It's really like, we're looking to see if you can meet our goals or meet what we're trying to pull off. So why do you think that movement needs to pay more attention to research and evaluation in our work?
So one, I'll say that movement has a lot to pay attention to right now. Is research and evaluation our first priority? The way that it's been done, no.
Yeah.
What I've been sitting with and what I think about like at least once a day is this question, how do we know that we are loved?
I love that question.
And so if we are to, as movement people, as movement spaces, think about evaluation, research, then to me, we should be thinking about it using those types of questions.
That's right.
Right? Like the funder world, these institutions that are asking questions, that's tied to capital, right? The question, how do we know that we are loved? How does our community know that we are loved? How does my block, like how does like my grandma and my family know loved? That's the question that sometimes even in our movement work, we get wrong. Actually aren't asking the people that we say that we're fighting for what it is that they believe.
That's right.
Makes them feel loved. And I think the reason why this is so important is because our positionality changes over time.
Yeah.
We were talking about when we first met at Bold and like, different. And, like you had not published 50 bajillion books. at that time.
That's right.
Right?
I was a facilitator that was only known to people who I was in the room with.
Right.
Yeah.
You know,
It was delicious. I loved it. Now I look back and like, I'm just like, that was great. I had no idea.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So like what you understand now and what I understand now about like what I think I know
Yeah.
about people,
Yeah.
about the people that I love and dearly care for, about my community,
Yeah.
like everything that we think we knew pre 2020 even.
Yes.
Like those things shift.
Mm-hmm.
People change, communities, circumstances change.
That's
So it's really important to keep asking those questions, even when we are guided by that fire and that passion for liberation.
that's right.
It's possible that what, you know, folks in Atlanta believe that they need to know that love is not the same as what they did in 2019. And we have
That's
to keep
right.
finding that out.
Yeah. I think that question is it's like a transformational question for organizers to ask ourselves. It's like, how do we know we are loved, and how do our communities know that they are loved, that we are loved? And when I first heard you start to speak about research in that way, and start to speak about it, I was like, this is a way that we start to understand what kind of relationships we actually have with each other. To me, it felt like an answer to something that had always troubled me. Was I'm like, how as organizers are we not engaged in manipulation, right? That we get very passionate about our worldview, our analysis, and our
Yep.
idea of what needs to happen, and then we kind of try to fit the numbers of people on our block into that worldview somehow.
Yeah.
And we're like, I'll help you out with your issue, but really I'm trying to move you left along my vision, right? And I feel like that work of research and evaluation is like, wait, how do we know what you want? How do we know what we want? How do we measure where we are in relationship to each other? How do we love you? How do we allow you to love yourself? And if we don't actually love where you're going, then what happens, right? Because I think that shows up in the quality of work. I
Yeah.
think that shows up in the longevity of the work. Like when we're like, oh, we love you when you're doing what we want you to do.
Right.
And then if you start being like, but our community actually has a different vision than yours, then we're like, sorry, we moved. So I feel like so much of what you offer, also just on a very basic level, it's like, are we doing what we say we're doing? Like if I tell you I love you,
Yeah.
and I'm like, yeah, I love you, and because I love you, I'm gonna like recycle. Like I'm gonna make sure that your recycling program works because I love you so much.
Yeah.
And then if there's never that follow-up and the recycling is just sitting there and it never gets picked up or gets taken to the trash dump instead of the recycling or whatever, I'm like, how good is my love in that scenario? Or like, what do I need to learn about love in that scenario? So I think it's actually really radical. Like, again, top priority, it depends on where I think the organization is and where the group is. I think every year groups should have some period where they sit and evaluate, like, how are we doing according to what we say we're trying to do, right? I also feel like you make it really accessible. And so I wanted to ask you that question of like, are there basic practices that people in movement could do to improve the culture of evaluation inside of their work, inside of their networks, inside of their communities?
Yeah. This is a tough question.
Yeah. Like, are there, because I often think about that as like, how do we shift culture?
Yeah.
Like practices shift culture, culture invites new practices, and it's like this cycle. But I'm like, how do we shift movement towards a culture of like, yeah, we evaluate ourselves, not because capital demands that of us.
Right. And I think that's what makes the question tricky, right?
Yeah.
Because often we're trying to figure out like what is it that we need to be doing. And
Right.
sometimes it's actually just that we're being asked to do something that should be asked to do. And that's like foundations. That's on funders where they're saying something that social scientist, I'm like, well, actually, that's damn near impossible to prove. But, you have some program officers who may be like, well, try anyway to prove this, right?
They're like, well, just do it anyway and do it in 3 months.
Right, and do it in 3 months. And I mean, shout out to like the program officers that are disrupting that. And I know several of them
Yes.
who are.
Things are changing. I see the changes. Yeah.
Yeah, like some folks are really doing things differently. So I'll say that some of it is not like our responsibility, right? Um, when we think about like practical ways that we get better about reflection,
Yeah.
and I'll just say there's actually a reason for this, right? That has nothing to do with getting your grant money.
That's right.
There was an amazing project that, and I'll keep it vague, but it was about, anti-incarceration. There was like all of this massive organizing work that was done. There were so many like ups and downs, trials and tribulations, like, but they won.
Yes.
And then after they won, they moved on.
Yes.
And so the law was that we didn't know really how it happened.
Yeah.
There was no like reflection and documentation and and questions that were asked. So a part of that like historical knowledge,
that's right.
part of understanding like what went well, what didn't go how I wanted it to go or how we wanted it to go. How do we change? How do we do things differently next time? Or like even just like, damn, we did that. Like, do you see what ends up happened and this happened? This,
That's
like
right.
That's actually why I think it's useful. And maybe evaluation is not even the right word. It may be just it's useful for us to think about reflecting what we've done.
Yes.
So that we are working toward liberation from an informed place.
That's right.
And we're informing ourselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's, one of the biggest principles of emergent strategy is really that nonlinear iterative process. Mm-hmm. And the idea is you're not doing the same thing over and over again. You're making the adjustments, but based on what? And I think so often we've gotten, especially with social media, I think we can get in a culture of making adjustments based on what we think others perceive of us.
Yes.
Rather than making adjustments based on the tangible results of the work, the tangible results within a community, the sense of relationship, the sense of power. Ultimately, that's the thing I'm always interested in. I'm like, do you feel more powerful now?
Yeah.
In being able to practice love with each other and practice community with each other. Like, can you do that better than you could last year and before? Yeah. And if not, why not? And is the community experiencing some beautiful thing that y'all feel all toxic internally in that same moment?
Yes.
What's happening there? Because I think that practice of Black extraction, it's like it's so ingrained in the American experiment, particularly, that we do it to ourselves. We're just like, oh, I will just sacrifice myself and become the rug and everyone else will walk on it and they'll feel great or whatever. I'm like, no, we need to reflect on breaking those patterns or whatever. So I think it's so important.
Absolutely.
But I think what you're saying here is even just developing a culture of reflection, which can happen in every meeting. There can be a period of how was this last week, right? In every relationship, like how have these last 6 months been in our work, but just starting to ask and be open to hearing the answers is so big.
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think it is that culture of reflection. I think it's the culture of understanding that it's okay to understand that we made mistakes and to admit to that.
Yes.
I think in movement work, the reason why mistakes can be so scary is because stakes are so high.
Yes.
So when we think about evaluating ourselves or reflecting on what happened, like very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
It's actually really emotional.
Yeah.
And so, and then on top of that, it's just not it's not common practice.
It's not.
So
It's
it's,
the opposite in some
yeah,
ways right now.
yes, totally.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think, yes, it's up to us to redefine what it means. We're
Yeah.
not universities. Grassroots organizations are not foundations.
That's right.
The standards really do have to be different. And I think for people who are engaging with foundations, I think the demand, the request, the
Yeah.
ask is that the standards and the processes that are applied to other institutions shouldn't be applied the same way
Yeah.
to organizations. So, yeah.
Yeah. So, in the spirit of like, it's okay to say we didn't do things well or didn't do things right, that's part of how you came to be in Holding Change. And so I'm like, let's talk about that because, I knew back when we did Emergent Strategy, I was like, assessment is a huge part of this. Like, and I always do what I think of as my own little janky self-reflection. Like I'm just like, okay, I have the questions. I don't know if these are good questions or not. I know questions need to be asked, like I'm like, but even, I can always tell, this has always been my weakness as a facilitator, is I'll be like, here's the question. And then I'll ask 3 different questions and be like, that's the question. Answer the question. What's wrong with you? Why are you so confused? Right. And I'm like, it's not my skill set. Right. Mm-hmm. Like I'm an interviewer. I can be in a dialogue, but to actually sit and evaluate is not my skill set. And I think that showed up in Emergent Strategy. Mm-hmm. And I wanted to have you do the assessments for that book, and the timing, it's just like, I was just like, I have never done a project like this. I didn't understand how the timeline would work. Yeah. So this time for Holding Change, I was like, okay, I know that I want Zuri doing this way back in the, like early in to the process. I knew I wanted you here. But why did you say yes? And you can be as honest as you need to be about what you saw in Emergent Strategy, and why you said yes to doing these assessments.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. Because I was like, oh, I should have done these. I was like, oh, my Virgo self. I was like,
You're like, girl, these could have been dinner. Perfection was not out of your reach, girl.
Yeah. At the time when you asked me, I did have a ton going on. Yeah. But I was like, let me just say yes. Yeah. Figure it out.
You really did have a lot going on. I'm like so grateful.
But I really feel like we have been in relationship for so long that the project was more than like, oh yeah, just help out with this book. I understood who the work was for. And so for me, it was really important that I made the time for it. So that was like a big reason. And, I believe in your work, and I was just like, all right, we're going to figure this out. I was also like, when you sent me kind of like what you were trying to do, which is different from Emergent Strategy, because Emergent Strategy was like, okay, we're going to put these things at the end. Yeah. These are questions, these are ways to assess things. Mm-hmm. This was like, Zuri, help me figure out how to do a choose your own adventure.
Yes. Exactly.
Thing with this book so people can use it as a tool. Which yeah. I was like, yes, like this is actually really important so that the book is cool. Yes. So that people can open it and immediately they need. It's not like folks have just like days and days of days to do all of the reading.
That's right.
I mean, just to be honest, like folks who are doing facilitation, I mean, I don't know, are y'all reading books every week? Probably not.
People don't, and you know, even with, I mean, it's been so interesting. Like since Emergent Strategy came out, I have people tell me all the time, like, I have that book, you know, like, and everyone talks about it, you
Right.
know, but I'm like, okay, and it's okay if you haven't read it. You know, in Emergent Strategy, I was like, there's 3 pages you need to read: 15, 41, and 42. The
Mm,
rest is, you know, playing around with those fundamental ideas. But for
yes.
this one I was like, I think if people did assessments at the front, they could be like, I just need to go straight to
Yep.
mediation and I'm good, right? Based on what I'm seeing here. Um, yeah. Even though, you know, I will say this here, originally the whole format of the book was going to be the choose your own adventure book. And it was like with tons of guidelines through that book. And then I kept going back and forth with the publisher and they were like, it might confuse people, right? It's like you're trying to be helpful, but it actually might be more adventure than actually supporting people. And I had to really let that in. Like, I am going to do a choose your own adventure book, and you'll probably be involved in that one. I've got to figure out when to do it. But this one, I do think it's like choose the wisdom or choose the
Hmm.
guidance that you actually need.
Hmm.
And can you speak a little bit to the process? Like, how did you end up with these assessments? Like, how'd you get from what I sent you to something clear?
Yeah, it took time. It definitely took some time. And the
Yeah.
first thing, so at first I also was just like, I was like, I don't know. Like I was like, I don't know how I'm going to actually do this.
Yeah.
I knew, I was like, I know that I can.
Yeah.
Will I pull it off? Um, but I felt strongly that that I would get clear,
Yeah.
would become clear. And so when I said yes, I kind of, we figured out the timeline and I was like, ooh, okay, I have some time.
Yes.
And then I came back to it when I was in North Georgia. I was like in the mountains
Yeah.
and I was reading your work. I was reading what, so many amazing authors write. And I just sat with it and it started to make sense in my mind. Like
Yeah.
it just shifted. It wasn't anything that I really had to work at. It just really
Yeah.
clear because I was I was in an uncluttered,
Yes.
nature filled, beautiful space.
Yes.
So that was like what I needed. And then um over several days in Atlanta, so in Decatur, right outside of Atlanta, I was in this amazing space, which I'm here now, which is the Yes Please Book House.
Mm.
And this book house was created really to honor Black women and women of color writing. And it
Yay.
has like amazing books everywhere.
Oh, wow.
And you know, definitely follow Yes Please Books. They're on IG.
I'm like, yes, I'm going to please follow them.
They're opening up next year. This space was really pivotal. Lauren Jones was really pivotal in like creating the environment where I could like sit with it and understand
Mhm.
what needed to happen for this project. So
Awesome.
yeah.
What I love is, and just so folks know, I have maybe 2 more questions. So if you have questions for Zuri, or questions for us about this, you can drop them in the question box and I will start to turn towards those as I get through mine. What I love about these questions is the way the assessments came out was you can return to them. You know, this is something I think about a lot, that I didn't want it to be like a Cosmo magazine thing where it's like you just do something out of context and then you never look at it again, but you like walk around like, I'm a top, you know, it's just like, what? Like, that's not. So I wanted something that was like, this is where I am now. And then I could come back in 6 months and do this assessment again and be like, oh, like I've changed. And I feel like you did a beautiful job of gathering that, and doing assessments that could be used on the front or the back of a process. So it could be like, what is the state of the group's relativity, relationality, And then let's come back at the end of a facilitation and be like, oh, we can see that they're relating deeper and more slowly and more passionately with each other. So I want to thank you for that, because I feel like that you really did. You went above and beyond what I hoped would be able to be in the book, and it still feels accessible. Like, I feel like when you're flipping through, it doesn't feel like I am a data point.
Right.
It feels like, oh,
Good.
I'm a human
Yeah.
interacting with humans, observing humans. How would you like to see people use these assessments? Like when you imagined folks in movement using them?
Oh, I love this question. Um, I really like the proposition of the assessments, which
Mm-hmm.
trust your ability to understand what's happening
Yeah.
and trust your ability to reflect on what you need and
Yeah.
what you're noticing.
Yeah.
So that's like a foundational assumption of the book, right? And so what gets me excited about it is that people will say, like, all right, like I'm doing this thing.
Yeah.
I have my tools, I have my book,
Mm-hmm.
this facilitation, and, like the facilitators that I'm working with, like, I see them, they're like, oh yeah, I'm reading it, I'm getting into it. What I imagine is that before, and like you said, before and after they're working with folks, that they're able to use it to track what's happening over time. Like, how am I doing? How are we doing?
Yeah.
And there's also some assessments that are about like ongoing relationships, like
Yes.
co-facilitating, right?
Yeah.
Um, I just think co-facilitation, like when I do facilitate, like the only way I want to do it.
Yeah.
And it's a relationship that I think is really um, underplayed and like not paid attention to very much.
That's right.
But I mean, I would just be super excited to know that facilitators are getting together and like drinking tea and like talking about like how do we relate to each other? Like how are we
Yeah.
in session? How do I know, that how do I know when you're tired? How do you know when I'm tired?
Yes.
How do we communicate what we need? Like that to me, like if people are using it in that way, like the work is done. Like
Yes.
would be
I
so.
feel similarly. I feel similarly like I remember when I first started facilitating and I would be thrown into co-facilitation. People at that time, it was not unusual for people to be like, we hired you and we hired this other person to come help us.
Yep.
And it would be like, I don't know that person. You'd get there and be like, oh, we literally have wildly different political perspectives on everything and blah, blah, blah. And then trying to figure out like, this is a whole thing that's happening upon which all this is supposed to rest.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not going well. So I feel like, but I also felt over many years like your co-facilitator should not necessarily be someone who's just like you or who functions exactly like you.
Sure.
That actually is, I think we do a disservice to groups when we show up like Stepford wives, we're the same. I think the strongest co-facilitations I've had have been with people where, like Makani and I, where it's like we are deeply politically aligned to Black liberation. Like we're both in it long term.
Yes.
And we have really different ways. Like I'm like the doula midwife, like, let's breathe our way through it and like let's get lost and like I'm listening to y'all. And she's like, I have a clear strategy. I am not a midwife. I am a facilitator. I'm a strategist. Like I'm moving this. And the balance,
Yep.
right? Like I sat down with these and I was like, oh, the balance of this is so beautiful, right? Like going through the co-facilitation process with her, which we've done that many times. Or facilitators who are more introverted and extroverted, some basic stuff like that, where it's like the number of times I've worked with facilitators who are like, I like to meet for 3 hours afterwards. And I'm like, I do not. I want to go sit in the bath and then tomorrow morning we can see what our dreams told us to do or whatever.
Great.
Yeah, so I really appreciate how you envision it. I really appreciate the work you put into it. I'm looking now, I'm like, so far we seem to be satisfying people's question needs. They're not like bringing us additional stuff, which happens.
Good.
So with the little bit of time, that we still have, I would love to hear if you want to share, if you're open to sharing what you're writing now. Like, what are some of the things you're working on? What is liberatory research? And, like, how is that growing? How is that field growing?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, thank you for asking. So, I think I mentioned I was doing this, liberatory leadership work,
Yeah.
which has been, it's been so challenging, so eye-opening for me, and it's with people that I love and respect. Trista Shum, which, she and I have worked together for some years on Power 50, and I got to see some amazing facilitation with her and Aida Cuadrado Bazo and Viveka Chin. I mean,
Beautiful.
some powerful facilitators that I've witnessed and learned from. Um, Powerful leaders that I've learned from, like Denise Perry.
Ah,
Um, just so these people, these experiences, are all informing like the work and the writing I'm doing around liberatory research,
right.
which is specifically about creating space for people who have been trained the similar ways that I've been trained,
Yeah.
starting to really interrogate how can we, you know, basically question the system. How do we break these myths around research being neutral? How do we
Yes.
start to interrogate power? How do we center community voice? Like all of these big questions, it's not enough to consider them on your own. It's
Yeah.
really powerful when you start asking those questions in community, also really healing. And so that's what I've been up to. We had a e-course for 3 months, and oh my gosh, it was like the most beautiful thing. Um,
Mm.
I initially thought, okay, we're going to be talking about methodology. We're going to be talking about like strategies to, gather more community input. We're going to be talking about equity. And what it actually turned into was just like a very powerful healing space.
Wow.
Yes. So that has been my joy. And so a lot of what I've been thinking about and writing about lately has been about that.
Yeah.
I'm in the final stretch of my PhD work.
Ugh.
Whew.
Like extending your energy. You're almost there. You've got this.
Much. But what I'm writing about is the cultural technology of Black folks, Indigenous folks, people of color,
Mm.
how that technology shows up when they're in institutional spaces.
Ooh.
What does it mean to have someone decolonize their mind and show up in this organization? Like, how does that change the organization? Or does it, and they
Right.
go out and create something else? So I'm talking to some badass leaders over the next few months.
Wow.
That's what I'll be writing about. So,
Amazing.
yeah, it's good stuff.
That sounds great. And I feel like I know we've been joking a little bit about the Virgo nature of things, but do you feel like being a Virgo makes you better suited for this work?
Um, I'm a Virgo sun, I'm a Cancer moon though.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So, I think what I've learned that's partly my nature, but also I think anyone can learn
Yeah.
is that, it's like love and rigor, right?
Love and rigor.
Love and rigor. So you can be skillful with statistics. You can be very skillful about like, this is how I create an assessment. This is how I'll measure something in a useful way.
Yeah.
Then also understanding that it has to be connected to real people. It has to be connected to people and help them make meaning.
That's right.
So, so yes, I think, being a Virgo is great, and being someone who's very concerned with like tenderness and care is a good combination for this work.
So basically, you're perfect. I love that. And I love you, and I'm so grateful for the contribution you made to this book, and through this book, the contribution that you're making to so many other people's lives through it. I'm already getting a lot of feedback from people who are using it. I'm just like, oh, this is working, and the goal is never to push it on people. It really is like, I just want to make something that people can use if they want to use it. And it feels like what you've done is in alignment with that. It's like, if you want this,
Right.
it's here. You can know this. You might. I also imagine there's people who are like, I'm going to run to the Black Feminist Wisdom section.
Right.
And maybe it'll take a couple years before I realize I need the assessment section. It's like,
Right.
all good.
It's
Figure it out. It's fine. It'll be there when you're ready for it. Thank you so much. Thank you for taking time out of your sabbatical moment. I'm sending you like love, rest, ease, good baths, good nature, like, that feeling of waking up in the morning and everything is yours to choose. Like, I love that, and I want that for you.
Thank you, my dear. Thank
Yeah.
you so much. And thank you, everyone, for being here and listening. It was such
Yeah. It's so sweet. The humans who show up are so sweet for these.
Right.
And I like those humans. I will be posting this as soon as we finish. I will save it into the IGTV series, the Holding Change IGTV series. So it's here if you have other people in your life who could benefit from thinking, reflecting on evaluation, research, assessment. It's all here. And we love y'all. I believe the next person who's going to be in the series is Malkia Cyril. So once we have that scheduled, we're going to have Malkia, we're going to have Adaku, and a few other contributors. We're trying to get all of them in. So we'll see if we can do it. Love y'all. Love you. Talk to you soon.